We have reached a point in our culture where statements of obvious fact are seen as being aggressive and discriminatory and offensive. The concepts of self-identity and identity have been blurred together in a very inaccurate way that I'd like to clear up. You are not how you self-identify. There is a difference between what you are and how you label yourself. What you are is your identity. It is something which is inescapable fact. How you identify is a verbal label that you put on yourself. So for example, if I were to say, I am a female, this would be a factually incorrect statement. I do not have the biology of being female. But if I were to say, I identify as female, this is a very different proposition. Though I may not have the corresponding biology, I might view myself as being very feminine or identifying closer with traditionally feminine characteristics. But unfortunately, in our culture, these two things have been blurred, where people think if I say something like, I am a female, that means I am actually a female, and not I am labeling myself as a female. Now, this mistake has been taken to its beautiful extreme by people who are 50-year-old men that identify themselves as 5-year-old little girls, or by humans who identify as non-humans. There's a whole category of what's called Otherkin. I kid you not, Google Otherkin, of people who identify as mythical creatures and so on. And people are so afraid of offending somebody else that they are willing to overlook factually incorrect statements like saying you are not an elf if you identify as an elf, just because they don't want to be perceived as bigots. I was just watching a video the other day of a young lady who identified herself as a cat, and she would go around meow meow meowing and licking herself and grooming herself, and she had a partner that also identified as a cat, and they would communicate in cat language. And here's the truth: to the extent that those people actually think that they are feline, they are deluded. This is just a matter of delusion. Our culture has so suppressed this idea of objective truth and objective reality that people, for fear of looking bigoted, aren't willing to lovingly put their arm around their friend and say, I'm sorry, if you think that you are a cat, you're confused, because what we mean by cat is certainly not what you are. And it doesn't take too much imagination to see that the underlying principle of you are how you self-identify is wrong. If somebody self-identifies as a vegetable, it doesn't mean that they are a vegetable. If somebody self-identifies as a table or an inanimate object, that doesn't actually mean that they are a table or inanimate object. And in fact, it means if you care about the person, you should probably help them come out of their delusion to the extent they think they are what they are not. Now, of course, this idea is very controversial because of transgender people in particular that have a set of biological objective facts but self-identify as the opposite sex. And of course, the resolution I see as most compassionate and most truthful is to say, look, there are biological facts, right? If you have male genitalia, just thinking you don't have male genitalia doesn't mean that you don't have male genitalia. This is just objective reality. But if somebody says, look, and understands, I realize I am biologically a male, but I wish to be treated as if I were a female. I wish to be treated in a feminine way. I identify with a more feminine mindset. Then great, more power to them. But there's a radical difference between I'm going to treat you as a female and we're going to act as if you are a female for all intents and purposes and you are actually a female. I think part of the confusion is people think that there are softer things in which this concept of self-identity you can get away with versus harder things like biological sex that you can't actually get away with. So if I would say something like I identify as a jazz consumer, like I like jazz, then just by virtue of the fact that I'm stating that's my identity is in effect my identity. It's something that is necessarily but intrinsically subjective. But this is different than saying I identify as a cat or a vegetable or an object. That is not something which is subjective. That's a claim about objective reality. So if we want to promote a culture of valuing objective truth and grounding in reality, then we have to make a very clear distinction between self-identification, self-labeling, and objective reality and objective identification. It's one thing to say, hey, please treat me as if I was a girl, versus, hey, in reality, I am actually a girl. Hey, I want to give a special thank you and shout out to two of my Patreon supporters, Mark Gove and the newest supporter, David Richelson. Thank you both very much for showing your support for the creation of a rational worldview. And if you want to show your support too, then check out my Patreon page over at patreon.com/Steve Patterson, where you can send over a couple of bucks a month. And in return, not only will you have my eternal gratitude, but also you get a free copy of every book that I have ever written and every book that I will write in the future, which is pretty neat. So check it out.